Coming up on this episode of TechSNAP, the PlayStation Network's breach has been one incredible story, and over the last week or so, we've followed some of the most interesting details, and we're going to share them with you in this episode. I think you'll probably hear a few new things you haven't heard before. Then after that, along the lines of services being out and down, we'll give you a few tips and things to keep in mind when you're evaluating using cloud services. This is stuff for businesses and individuals. After that, did you know that the U.S. government is shutting down 137 data centers this year? Where's all that going? Well, we're going to tell you that and what this means. We'll follow that up with an interesting look at Google's data center security practices, and we'll wrap the episode up with another Dropbox controversy. Dropbox has stepped in it again, but this time I kind of think it's a cool thing, and Alan thinks it could be disastrous. All that and more in this episode of TechSNAP. Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to TechSNAP. It's our third episode, and TechSNAP is the show where two longtime system administration veterans, IT guys that have been through the trenches, sit down and give you an in-depth analysis of tech news and topics. My name is Chris, and joining me as always is Alan. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris.
Hey, welcome back, man. And it's our third episode. It feels like a nice accomplishment, and I decided to celebrate by wearing my Hawaiian shirt. You like that? It's and again, it's been... not only have the numbers been really strong for a new show, they've been fantastic, but it's been just really some great feedback from everyone, and we want to let you know that we've only mentioned it once, but we have an email address, and it's techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, and we'd love to hear your story, ideas, and suggestions. We really want to know what you guys are interested in. Yeah,
what are you guys interested in? What do you want us to cover? And because we tend to do news, but not necessarily right away, because it takes time to research it and for all the details to come out, right?
Yeah, give it the analysis.
Like our top story has been going on for over a week, but we couldn't have done what we're going to do to it if we had tried to do it sooner.
Right.
And because of that, we're open for you guys to tell us what you'd like to hear about.
Yep, absolutely. And we're always going to be looking for more and more ways also to incorporate that sort of feedback loop into the show too. So the more we get the ball rolling on that, I think the better we'll make the show altogether. Hey, Alan, let's talk about our top story. So it is, like you insinuated, it's been going down now for about a week, and it's just fit in with so much of what we talked about already on TechSNAP, and that's, the cloud, and in this case, it's Sony's cloud. The PlayStation Network is down, and right now it's down like indefinitely. What's going on?
Yeah, they said some of the features might come back in about a week, but the full thing, they have no idea. They're
physically rebuilding the network, and
yes, that's one of the interesting things.
It's absolutely an interesting thing.
Basically, how it started was some people wrote some new custom firmware to get around this issue that you can't run whatever you want on your own PlayStation.
Well, it was really because the PlayStation 3 got an update that removed Linux, the capability of dual booting, and when that crowd, which was a passionate crowd, and a very motivated crowd, when this is just my opinion, but I believe when they took the initiative to figure out how to break the system to get Linux back on there, they essentially started the domino effect that has led to this entire thing. So by Sony removing that feature, they started this process. Now, would it have maybe happened eventually anyways? Probably. But it seemed to be the domino effect here.
Yeah, so what happened was when they wrote this custom firmware, which is just a modified one, a version of the Sony one, they found that if they just changed a couple of addresses in it, they could access the Sony development network, the test version of the PlayStation Network. And on that, when it prompts you to put in a credit card to access paid content, it's because this is a test network, it just approves the transaction as if it happened, but it doesn't, right? So you just type in credit card number 4111111.
They assume that it's a partner developer who's signed NDA agreements and things like that, who's testing their application or testing some sort of functionality
before it launches on the real PlayStation Network.
Yeah.
But because of this, some people were able to get access to all of the paid content on the PlayStation Network.
Right.
The music, videos, and games and so on that you're supposed to have to pay for. And people found this and they're like, oh, this is interesting. And they start poking around, and eventually they managed to compromise the PlayStation Network and gain access to the private data.
So there was some sort of way for the two networks to communicate. So there was a network that would basically... to make them communicate.
In the back end, it's all the same network, right? They just have two different front ends.
I mean, first of all, okay, so let's start with the fact that you think about the level of privilege and access that this developer network had. And I don't know the numbers of developers for the Sony PlayStation, but I got to imagine it's a lot. I got to imagine that's a lot of people. And it just seems like that's an awful lot of privileges to give away to a ton of people outside your company to begin with. I mean, just at the fundamental ground zero level. But
more importantly, it seems that they didn't have real access controls on who got into the PlayStation Network. It was just if you swapped out the URL for the endpoint, for the API.
My understanding is that developers are given a specific development version of the PlayStation with a development version of the firmware, which I guess in theory has all that hard set in there.
Right, but if you just take the regular firmware and hex edit it basically to change that address, now you can access the developer network. There was no authentication or anything, as far as I can tell.
It's kind of surprising it hasn't happened already.
Yeah, the details are sketchy, but it seems like they didn't have all that much trouble getting into the developer network once they knew it was there.
So once Sony realized what was going on, Sony's response was to shut down the network.
Right.
And when it first came out, it took Sony quite a while to actually admit that that's what was going on.
This compromise happened somewhere between April 17th and 19th, which is more than a week ago now.
Yeah, we're recording this on the 28th.
Yeah. And at first, they were like, all right, somebody broke in, and the reason they shut it down is because people were stealing paid content, right? So they turned it off so that would stop. Now, the mistake they made was in assuming that nothing else was taken. Right, when your network is compromised, you automatically start by assuming everything was compromised, and then go about proving certain things were not compromised.
Sure.
But Sony went the other way. They're like, all right, we'll just turn it off and say we don't know why it's down.
Right.
It's just down, and then hire an external security firm to come in and audit the machines and see what happened, and then after a couple of days, so I guess Wednesday of this week, they announced, hey, everybody's personal information was stolen from our network.
Right. Now,
a week ago. We've known that our thing was compromised for over a week, but we didn't tell anybody until just now, until we're absolutely sure it was stolen. And
now they're doing it in a way that feels very CYA, cover your own arse, because it's the language is all done in a way where it says, in fact, these are direct quotes. Of course, we have sophisticated controls in place that were compromised, and we can't be absolutely positively sure that your credit card information wasn't taken, though we believe it was at least encrypted, but we don't know if it's been taken. So you want to start monitoring that, but we're just being super vigilant. That's another direct quote. And there's a lot of posturing here now that makes it sound like they're trying to be, the hyper informational people that are going out of their way. When they shut down the network, I had two reactions. My first reaction is wow, Sony realizes they have a fundamental architecture issue. Before we really even had any information that the PlayStation Network was compromised, that just immediately to me sent these alarms off that says, oh, they've got a ground zero problem. And then the other thing that I thought is how incredibly ballsy. Really, I mean, in a way, it's kind of nutting up and admitting that, oh, we've got to scrap this completely, and it's just too dangerous to run it anymore. And in some ways, that would be an extremely, extremely difficult decision to make. And I'm impressed to see such a large company turn on a dime like that and make that decision, which in the end, while sucks right now, especially for like people that have Portal 2 that can't activate it to get the free PC version, even though that was supposed to be a big deal, those people are completely screwed right now.
That's the problem with storing your rights in a cloud.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's when you depend on an online service. Heck, we've even seen it with software activation. You get completely stranded.
Exactly.
So I guess my first take is Sony. You guys have an issue here that is your core design problem. My concern is their posturing now makes it sound like they're victims of a violent attack almost. I'm not condoning the actions of the attackers. But I think the real core issue here was Sony's original build of this PlayStation.
Yeah, it was fundamentally missing critical parts of the security system.
Yeah. Right.
This developer network was not secured properly and had too much access to the non-developer network and the customer information.
The other thing that seems really kind of striking is, who knows, right? This is all conjecture, but it does seem to be a certain level of intimacy with the design. I mean, if once you're on getting on is a lot different than bridging two separate networks.
Yeah.
And either that was painfully obvious, and again, their whole basic design seems to have lacked some serious consideration, so that's entirely possible, or somebody knew how to do it, or somebody was at least told how to do it. So wouldn't that be interesting?
The people that have been trying to break these PlayStations to run Linux on them and stuff, some of them know the system very intimately. But yeah, it does seem that, well, the developer network obviously is meant to be a mirror of the actual network, but it does seem that they got to the treasure pretty quickly.
Right? Well, we don't know, I suppose, but it does seem that way.
Well, it seems, Sony seems fairly certain they did get the customer information. They're just not sure about the credit cards. And because
this is another...
Sony, I think the reason they took so long to tell people is they're hoping to not have to tell people at all.
Absolutely. You guarantee that. I guarantee that. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. They didn't want to have to come out and admit that. That's incredibly embarrassing.
Yeah. And there's lawsuits already because Sony knew for a week and didn't tell anybody.
Interesting. Right. Yeah.
And if your identity gets stolen and your life gets screwed up because of that, and it might have been prevented if you found out a week earlier.
Yeah, JP Viewer 0 in the live chat room right now just linked us to this article here from CNET. It says that Sony is already being sued for the data breaches.
Yeah, but mostly because they didn't disclose it right away. And
right.
The PlayStation Network itself, does that operate out of the United States, or is that in part of the parent company in Japan, or
because maybe, a little both, probably spread out. Yeah,
there are some laws about when a data breach happens, how quickly you have to do, and what steps you have to take.
There are specific laws depending on which state of the United States you're operating in. Like I know specifically,
and that seems to be a problem.
California has some very, very strict laws where you have to notify them immediately, kind of thing. So right. You're right. They could be.
But in a situation like this, which law applies? The law of the state where the servers physically were, the law of the state where the headquarters of the American part of the company is, or the headquarters of the company itself,
or the law of where the user was accessing from. Yeah,
and it gets all kinds of muddled.
Sure does. Something else that's kind of this. Trending is once again, another service that I use has my information out there now. So thank you, Gizmodo. Thank you. Whatever that mailing list was that got Netflix, and now thank you, Sony. And this has just been in the last few months. So thanks, guys. I almost wonder if I got to start making myself an alternate identity to sign up for these services. And at this point, I can't even keep track of which ones I've provided my credit card to or which ones I haven't yet. So I don't even know if my credit card information was on the PlayStation Network, to be honest with you. And now I can't log in and check.
Yeah.
So, sweet. Yep. Sweet. And it almost makes you want... anyways, I'll save that rant for another time, because I think the overall general thing that we need to probably have a little conversation here on TechSNAP, and there's no better time to do it, is the cloud in general. What happens when your identity is in the cloud?
So after the scare with Amazon last week, people are wondering, what happens when I have all my stuff in the cloud, and what do I have to be worried about? And, we've looked at it, and over the last couple of months, 4 different cloud providers have gone completely out of business or stopped providing cloud services at all. So that brings up a lot of questions. Even if the cloud provider you're using doesn't go out of business. So say you're with Amazon right now and you decide you want to move to somewhere else after the downtime. I know Reddit is considered doing that. So if you close your account with Amazon, what happens to your data that's in the Amazon cloud right now?
I guess you assume it's deleted?
Right. But even if you delete it, or they say that you deleted it for you, what about all the replicas? What about their backups? Right? It's still going to be in their backups somewhere.
The only reason I would lean towards believing they deleted it is because they just want to reclaim the storage for cost savings.
Right. But
that's really my only guarantee, though.
The backups they have are there, and their whole storage system is automated. Sure, they mark it to be deleted, but they do the garbage collection slowly when they need the space.
And they probably don't routinely go out, open up their backup archives and go purge. So yeah,
you can't erasing one person's data out of the middle of a backup is a major operation, really.
You'd have to have the system intentionally designed to allow for that.
Yeah.
So the other thing is, from a business standpoint, just a matter of a perfect example, at the beginning of April, JupiterBroadcasting's.com's DNS expires because it's registered at some DNS provider that has the wrong contact information that we can't get out of. And we're just gone. You know, my entire company is just doesn't exist.
Yep.
And I can only imagine how places like Reddit and other places who are struggling to make themselves an independent living, you got to wonder, what do you do when the cloud goes away? What are your thoughts on it, Alan?
Yeah. There's all kinds of problems you can run into.
Hey, what is your solution, though? Because honestly, I don't think the solution is don't use the cloud. No, I think that's like saying, you know, when the answering machine, when voicemail came out, it was don't use the voicemail, use the answering machine. I mean, it just doesn't seem like a long-term practical solution because that's just where everything's going.
Yeah. Part of it is maybe having more than one cloud provider. The problem there is vendor lock-in, right?
And
each
cost.
cloud is so different. And each cloud is so different that it's not easy to move from one to another or to try to maintain two of them concurrently.
Like you could run, so you have options like on Amazon EC2, you can run an entire virtual machine where you could run an entire Linux install with a MySQL server. And then I could have another data center, like say like at Scale Engine or Server Beach or Rackspace, where I'd have another MySQL Linux server on with MySQL. But the problem is that is extremely expensive to run on EC2 like that. The most cost-effective way is to use like their database system that's like its own EC2 language.
Right.
Which means you can only use it on EC2. Same with Google offers a service similar to that, and so does Microsoft now.
Exactly. And so you get locked in with these vendors. And so you can't change easily if one of them goes out of business or raises their prices or stops being good or for whatever reason you want to move.
Is no one working on some interconnector that will...
There are some people writing a standard, but there's no reason to believe everybody's going to adopt this standard. Right? Especially with the cloud, everybody's trying to be on the cutting edge, so they're always going to be trying to do things that the standard doesn't cover.
Why can't everything be SQL, and then when you want to communicate between two data centers, it's like an SSH tunnel with SQL?
Well, that's for SQL, but this is about the cloud, right? Which is just
it's everything.
Block storage.
It's block storage, yeah. Or it can be file storage. It can be, it could be.
It's virtual machines, and everybody, some use VMware-based ones or Zen, or it's all different.
Well, I'll tell you what I have done in the past is the client comes to me and says, we have this game, and we want this game to be X cost per month for us to operate. But we want to be able to have the flexibility of running a promotion in summer times where we could see a huge influx of traffic. Well, how do you build for that? Because traditionally, you'd have to buy like a super powerful 8-core server with put 16 or 24 gigs of RAM in that thing and put a nice fast drive array on there.
You'd have to buy all of that reserve capacity just in case you need it.
Exactly. So what I've done is I've kind of done a hybrid. Is in my approach, I have physical server that is mid-range, and it's just provided by it's a white box provided by the data center that is, you spec it out. It's like a quad Optron box or something like that with, 8 gigs of RAM or something and some storage. And what I've done though is I've tried to build in capacity that if things went crazy and got really busy, we'd just log into like something like EC2 and turn on some VMs, and we just have capacity for a few hours. So I've tried to use the cloud approach as more like as an augment to my setup, but I have the luxury of having predictable scalability in the most part. Sites like Reddit sometimes can have a huge spike of in the millions in a day, and that is extremely hard to be able to accommodate on demand. It's one of the things that cloud computing can offer very readily that you can't really build yourself at that kind of capacity and scale. Yeah,
the surplus capacity. And a lot of how the cloud works is aggregating that, having a lot of reserve capacity that you can spread between a bunch of customers, right? Because you have all this extra capacity and they're not all going to be using it at once. But depending on your cloud provider, there eventually is some limit what they can get right away.
We need like a set of protections. We almost need like a technology standards body to come up and say, cloud hosting providers should meet this spec. And it's like a volunteer thing that if you meet, you're just a more competitive cloud provider. And it is, it's like a checklist of like data portability. Can I get my data in and out in some sort of standard format?
Yep.
And, is it, some sort of provisions for when you do shut down, and some sort of guarantees for if I want to remove my service. There almost needs to be like this list, because it's getting to the point where certain sites can build their entire business off of these cloud platforms and then just be gone.
A lot of them do, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and part of that also is that these clouds need more transparency, right? Right now, the cloud is like a cloud, right? You can't see through it.
It's vague.
So there's things going on in there, and there's lots of promises, but there's no details on how it actually works, or why it's done this way, or what's happening in the background for you to actually be able to trust them.
Right.
And so when the cloud's opaque like that and you don't know what's happening inside, how can you trust it that nothing hinky is going on, and that their promise that it'll always be available will actually be met?
But I kind of find it funny that you have all of these issues, being that you essentially are a cloud provider of services. You know what I mean? Like,
ours is more of a grid than a cloud, but we have fancy diagrams on our web.
What do you see the difference between a grid? No, really. I mean,
we don't have unlimited capacity.
You can scale. You can guarantee that you can scale to a certain amount.
Yes, and we could scale more after that, but there would be a lag. But mostly it's that we just don't like the word cloud, because what everybody else sells as the cloud is too opaque, and they don't explain what's going on.
The marketing buzz term.
Yeah, and so we came up with some diagrams to kind of explain how our system works and give you an insight into how we architected it and how that protects you. And so that it's obvious where maybe there's a piece missing, and that it's either good enough or not good enough for what you need.
I like that. I mean, I think, and I guess I have a little more insight than most people do on that, so it's sort of easier for me to kind of understand, what you're talking about. But here's, I think I found your diagram here.
They're on the networking page at the bottom. There's 4 of them.
Yeah, at your site at scaleengine.com. So if I go data center tour, is that what I'm looking for? Or
at the bottom there, if you look at the Origin web cluster link.
Origin web cluster link, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, very nice.
And that kind of just explains a little bit about how it's architected.
This is really cool.
And Amazon doesn't give you anything like this, right? They're just like, it's magic.
And that's the difference between a small shop and a big shop, because
exactly
you are able to recognize that there's guys out there like myself. I mean, unquestionably, one of the things that factored in my decision to host on Scale Engine over something like EC2 or Rackspace was the fact that I want a solution that I can wrap my brain around, because I am comfortable with that. And I totally understand that not everybody is.
Comfortable with it. It lets you become comfortable with it and know what's happening.
I feel like it's not that I have more control, but I have more control in the ability to make an informed decision.
Right.
Which is really the power you need for this kind of hosting.
Yeah, is you need to have at least some idea what's going on and some proof to back up the promises.
I like Gravy Anima in the chat room. He says that you guys ought to cover or contact Reddit.
Yeah, Reddit might be a little too big for us, honestly.
Yeah, well, it's always a good reason to scale. All right, let's move on to the next story, because it kind of dovetails perfectly into this, and it's the fact that the feds are going to shut down 137 data centers in 2011, and actually they're moving them into the cloud.
So yeah, the U.S. government has announced that they want to close 137 data centers this year, and even more going forward, so that by 2015 they've consolidated their almost 2,100 data centers down to about 800.
This is really
interesting. Still seems like a lot of data centers.
It's being driven by the Fed's chief information officer, and this is part of his Cloud First initiative, which he unveiled last December. And it's essentially kind of funny. He built the case around moving into, and I believe if you read his original proposal, these will be private contract data centers. So their agency that controls these data centers now is going to transition into more of interfacing with the private sector to manage these. And his initial sort of pitch in December when he pitched this was, hey, you remember that Cash for Clunkers program we did? Well, our website really tanked. And that was because we couldn't scale. And then he mentions another website, which is kind of an opposite sort of apples to oranges comparison, and says, they're cloud hosted. They did great. So we should cloud host. It's going to save us $1 million a year in electricity too. So worth it. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe the private sector is better at managing these kinds of things. I don't know. What do you think?
So somebody else is paying for the electricity. It doesn't mean the electricity isn't getting used.
Oh, I know, and they're charging they're going to charge for the use of the electricity.
Yeah, exactly. And
what are your thoughts, though, on this in general about say, government data being held in private data centers?
Yeah, that's probably not a great idea.
Yeah,
maybe the private data centers have more at stake, and so or maybe they're just better at it. But in the end, it comes back to like the certificate authority thing we talked about on the first episode. If they have the business and a contract for 3 years, what impetus do they have to not cut back security to save money?
Now, if it's like other federal arrangements that I've seen, at least but these have all been in the case of the military. There's certain auditing and federal requirements they have to meet. So you would hope there'd be something like that they'd set in place for this. And I don't honestly know if other countries, they might already do this. You know what I mean? This might be something that's common around the world that I'm just not familiar with.
I don't know that for certain. I'm pretty sure in Canada it's not, but
I'll tell you one thing. I've been reading a book lately that I've been planning to mention, but I wanted to wait till I finish it, called The Master Switch. And maybe I'll talk about it later, but it really focuses in on the internet and where it's going to be in 20 years as far as the state of openness and things like that. One of the things that they talk about is that in the past, AT&T or Ma Bell, part of its, basically agreed upon monopoly status with the U.S. government is it built and produced hundreds of huge, massive data centers. And it made AT&T and the U.S. government just completely intertwined and dependent on each other for these two data centers. So maybe, moving away from that old traditional model of doing this and going into this more private-based...
competitive landscape.
Yeah, maybe that is a good thing.
Maybe.
Because, you look at... this is interesting, is we also in our first episode talked about the Facebook open data center thing, and it's funny to see Google kind of respond, and it dovetails again perfectly with data center security, because Google, who is extremely private about this stuff, has released a video covering their data center security.
Yeah, mostly the point of the video is them trying to promote the fact that using their cloud service, your data is secure. So they talk about how they deal with the old drives and how they rotate them so that
they have
your data is...
Every drive before it's put back into service goes through a stringent overwrite process. They have machinery that have been that, like, zero the drives.
And on top of that, they test that there's nothing left before... So after they zero it, they read it back and make sure it's zeroed.
Right. I mean,
which is a step a lot of people don't bother with.
Right. And then they also, they also talked about some of their biosecurity stuff, but it kind of sounded like not all of their data centers have that stuff. They said, here's an example of an eye scanner. Not that we have an eye scanner, but they have a sophisticated inventory management system for all of these drives.
All their hard drives have barcodes on them, and they manage them and swap them in and out. And part of that seems to be related to a couple of years ago when they did that study on how long hard drives last. Right. And it seems that, once it's getting to the point where the chance of failure is starting to climb,
they destroy
it and get fresh drives.
They go through a process that they're like, this first stage we do is almost guaranteed to destroy the drive, but then we put it in a shredder and they grind the drive up. Yeah.
So first they drive a piston to the top of the drive to deform the platter so that they're unreadable, and then they're like, well, now the drive's kind of a pain, so we just shred it so it's easier to ship it away.
Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Pretty interesting to see Google focus so heavily on physical security.
Well, they talk a little bit about their data security as well.
They do.
When your files are stored there, they fragment them and shard it so that your file is actually not stored in any one place.
Right.
And each piece of it is like anonymized, so that if you somehow broke in there and like stole a hard drive from one of the servers, you wouldn't be able to tell what any of the files were.
It would look like noise.
Right. It'd be bits of files, and it wouldn't have any metadata. So you have to basically have all the parts of the system and all their servers to put the file back together and know what the file is, like to get the file name and who owns it.
They also made a very, very quick throwaway reference to the fact that staff don't have access to the data and that there's multi-level protections in place and things like that. But honestly, Alan, it felt like they spent 20 seconds talking about that stuff and then 5 minutes talking about the physical security stuff.
Well, I think the video is definitely driven more towards management type than
and
technical
government,
type people.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what they're saying here is, hey, government, you wanted to move into the cloud. Well, our cloud is awesome.
Right. Let's talk about another cloud that's recently, personally, still a favorite of mine. Alan, boys, kind of a cloud-heavy episode, but first episode we kind of talked about some bad news from the Dropbox folks, and
then we followed it up in the next episode,
and now there's even more. Yeah, so here's the latest. Dropbox has actually kind of gotten a little bit of a smackdown for trying to kill an open source project. Now, this Dropbox story is actually kind of fun for me because I was just fortunate enough to sort of watch it evolve as it happened. I don't remember. I think I was either browsing Hacker News or like the news section on Reddit, and I saw somebody go in there and post, I just got a cease and desist, with invoking the DMCA from Dropbox over my open source project. And I thought, I'm always watching for News for Linux Action Show, and I thought, what? And so I clicked on this thing, and it's sure enough, what it is this guy has developed, I don't know, would you call it an exploit, Alan?
Well, kind of. But really what it is it takes advantage of the way Dropbox does deduplication. So what it allows you to do is, because Dropbox has a global deduplication domain so that they only store one copy of every file.
Absolutely, so, which pretty much like most big scale data providers do because of storage reasons like S3 and stuff.
Right. So the idea here was that I never had a copy of that file, but if I use this client to tell Dropbox I want to upload that file, they'll just add it to my Dropbox account without me having to upload it because I don't even have a copy.
Yeah.
And then I can download that file from my Dropbox.
It uses basically the back-end technology that Dropbox uses to compare files and see if they're the same. And it's kind of using a trick in that. And so, yeah, basically you can send any file to me and have it immediately show up in my Dropbox. Of course, I still have to download it.
Right, but the idea is that they reverse engineered the Dropbox API. And so basically you have a file in your Dropbox and you want to send it to me, but you don't want to make it public. So you give me the hash. I use this Dropbox or Dropship or whatever it's called app, and
I think it is Dropship.
Pretend like I just uploaded it. So now Dropbox says it's in my Dropbox, and I can download it. And basically, it would allow a way for you to say upload a pirated movie into your Dropbox, and then give the hash out. People would add it to their Dropbox and download it, but it wouldn't be public.
Oh, well, it's just letting you, I mean,
share
Dropbox,
files without making them public.
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of. I mean, Dropbox lets you have privately shared folders with friends, so you can have, like, we have a Jupiter Broadcasting folder that a lot of us work out of all the time that's just shared between us. So what's the difference between just having a shared folder?
You're just doing one file at a time, right? Because you wouldn't want to share everything with everybody everywhere.
This just honestly almost just seems like a feature that Dropbox should have.
It almost... but basically what Dropbox is concerned about is the fact that somebody reverse engineered their API. What makes this dangerous is I could do a brute force attack against it and just start making up random file hashes until it adds somebody's real files to my Dropbox, and then I can download them.
Oh, that would be possible.
Yeah. Now, there's infinitesimal number of possible hashes.
But there's also, if you figure how many files are on the Dropbox system, there's a lot of possibilities there too.
Right. So if I just brute force it for long enough, eventually I'm going to find some people's files that I shouldn't have access to, and now I do.
Oh my goodness.
Because they didn't necessarily they didn't share this file with me.
Right.
I just pretended I uploaded that file. So Dropbox thinks I have a copy of it, and so I should have access to it.
Does this Dropship open source tool? I think that's what it's called, right? In the show notes, we have Dropbox has tried to have it pulled invoking the DMCA, but they redacted that later. But it's been mirrored a few times, of course. Do you have to use this Dropship program to get that hash? I mean, there's no way for me to.
No. I think it's just the regular hashing algorithm on the file.
So I have to generate it.
Right. So, but
you know what I could use this for? Like, for example, and I would never do this. I'll just put this out there. But the way somebody could use this is like me with tech support. If I'm on somebody's computer, and often now I'm impressed with how many computers have Dropbox. And I could use this to get quick hashes of their Dropbox files, take those hashes back with me when I leave, put them on a thumb drive, put them in my whatever, email, whatever, and then go home and download all of their Dropbox contents in the privacy of my own home.
Or that's the long way around. If they still haven't fixed that config.db error, and you could just copy one file and get their entire Dropbox.
Right. I assume they'll fix that.
Yeah. But basically, it's another fundamental flaw with the way Dropbox works.
Maybe. I honestly think it could be. I mean, it could be if piracy would be an issue. But think about it in terms of streaming. Like, do you have Dropbox?
No.
If you have Dropbox and then you have a Dropbox app on your smartphone, if you have media files in your Dropbox, you can stream them to your device. Mm-hmm. Think about content distribution when you take out the need to upload and download. Completely, because now you can just link files on the back end, have the back end storage system distribute that instantaneously, and then you can stream it on your device. I could give you a 720p Blu-ray movie instantaneously.
Right. And
it's incredible.
Dropbox can do that when you specifically share it. But the problem with this is you're not allowing me to access that file. I just guessed the hash or was given the hash.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm stealing a copy of the file.
Well, what I'm saying is
basically everything that's in your Dropbox, someone brute forcing for long enough would be able to get it.
Yeah, and that is extremely scary. Again, we go back to don't store really private stuff in there.
Yeah.
But if they could fix this issue, but still allow this as a feature, I would love to be able to instantaneously send people files.
I don't know if it's possible, because if it's deduplicating based on the hash, and I can just pretend it's like, I want to upload this file with this hash, and it's like, we already have that, so you don't have to bother transferring it, and then
they're going to have to
it's in my account.
They're going to have to come up with some other.
Well, the problem is a lot of their access control stuff is in their app. So when somebody wrote an open source version that used their API without their app, all that security features were missing.
Wow, that's pretty risky when you have a public API with the intention.
Yeah, basically they have all their security in the wrong place. They have it in the apps that go on your device instead of in their cloud side.
Oh, Alan, you're killing me. I love Dropbox.
But basically, with them trying to get this app taken down, is they're trying to maintain the security of their API based solely on the fact that nobody knows what it is, right? Somebody figured it out, and so that broke their security by obscurity. Well,
one thing they could do is they could change it could be hash plus something else they use to determine the file. I mean, there's not a lot.
What they should do is all of the messages in their API should be cryptographically signed with like an HBAC or something, so that they know it's from their client. Yeah, but that requires storing the key for that in their client, and somebody can compromise that eventually. But they could rotate the keys every time they make a new version of the client, and it could provide some extra security to their API. But really,
and then if a certain version, and the other benefit is if a certain version of the Dropbox client got compromised, they could pull the keys for that client.
But basically, what they have to do is have the security on the API side, not on the client side.
Well, I mean, they can add that. They can go back and retrofit the API system to support that.
But how they thought it was going to work for all this time the way it was. If they had come out and told people this is how our system works, people would have been like, what are you thinking? That's ridiculous.
Yeah. I guess I'm a little verklempt because Dropbox is pretty integrated into my every single workflow that I have.
It works great for sharing files with people, but don't put anything in there that you don't want anybody in the world to be able to access.
Now, Alan, that just about, I think, wraps up everything we wanted to cover. Is there any other follow-up items you wanted to touch on before we ship off for the day?
No, I think that's about it.
Okay, now we've been kicking around a few ideas for next week's episode, but we definitely want to hear your feedback. So like we mentioned, you can email us, TechSNAP@jupiterbroadcasting.com. And then also, we're doing TechSNAP during the day at 1 p.m. Pacific, at least That's the day for a fair amount of you. At 1 p.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv. I don't know what time that is. What time zone are you in, Alan?
Eastern, that's 4 p.m. in GMT.
Oh, you are Eastern.
8 p.m.
Okay.
Yes, I'm Eastern, so it's 4 p.m. here when we start, and it's 8 p.m. GMT when we start.
On Thursdays. Yeah. On Thursdays over at jblive.tv. Mm-hmm. And then also, we're putting every one of these episodes out in an HD video, a large video format, which looks really good, like on the Apple TV or iPad, and then a mobile video, which goes great on an Android device or a Windows Phone 7 or an iPhone, iPod. And then also we have audio, MP3 and OGG versions, because we figure this show would make a great traveling companion as well. So we've made those available, and you can find all of those over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. And then generally in every episode show notes, there is a little drop-down box there where you can choose the show feeds, and then it'll just bring you to that. And there's also all the required iTunes feed entries as well there. So, All right, Alan. Hey, Alan, what if people want to get a hold of you? What's the best way? Do we have Alan at Jupiter Broadcasting for you? What do we do there?
I don't think so.
All right, why don't we do that? I'll set up an Alan. That's Alan with 2 L's at jupiterbroadcasting.com if you want to send something Alan's way. And of course, I'm Chris at Jupiter Broadcasting. And Alan, you're on Twitter too.
Yes, Alan Jude on Twitter. Yep,
there you go. And I'm Chris LAS on Twitter. Mm-hmm. All right, now the one last little plug before we sign off is by the time you're watching this, the kind of a fun little insider story is as soon as I get done recording this, I'm tearing down parts of the studio because we're shipping out to Linux Fest Northwest over this weekend. Now, by the time this episode comes out on Monday, hopefully we'll be back. And you should start seeing a lot of content coming out from Linux Fest Northwest, including we're going to have a live on-location Ubuntu review that we'll have done, and I'm sure that'll have been out too. So those are all things to look forward to. So check out jupiterbroadcasting.com for that, and also our youtube.com/Jupiter Broadcasting channel. All right, Alan.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next Monday.